This review was prepared by Tueanrat and Eleftherios Alamanos and published by TheoryHub. TheoryHub covers a wide range of theories and acts as a starting point for theory exploration in different research and teaching and learning contexts. This is a review of the cognitive dissonance theory. Cognitive dissonance theory aims to explain the relationships between the motivation, perceptions, and cognitions of an individual. Cognitive dissonance theory was first presented by Leon Festinger in 1957 in order to explain the relationships between the motivation, perceptions, and cognitions of an individual. It clarified the conditions that motivate individuals to change their opinions, attitudes, beliefs, or behaviors. Festinger defined the cognition as any piece of knowledge that an individual has about themselves or their environment. The theory was based on the belief that people strive toward consistency within themselves and are driven to make changes to reduce or eliminate an inconsistency. Cognitive dissonance theory began by postulating that pairs of cognitions can be either relevant or irrelevant to one another. If two cognitions are relevant and concurring, there is consonance. However, if two cognitions are relevant, but conflicting, the existence of dissonance would cause psychological discomfort and motivate the individual to act upon this. The greater the magnitude of dissonance, the greater the pressure for the individual to reduce the dissonance. The concept of cognition was relatively new at the time of the introduction of cognitive dissonance theory. Before that, the relationship between human attitudes and behaviors was understood as a complex process that involved motivational, emotional, affective, and perceptual factors. Therefore, the theory was one of the breakthroughs for research in the psychology field as it revolutionized thinking about human psychological processes. The theory is different compared to other consistency theories as it defines dissonance and consonance in relation to a specific cognition, which usually is related to a behavior. Cognitive dissonance theory made it possible to identify the determinants of attitudes and beliefs, the internalization of values, the consequences of decisions, the effects of disagreement among individuals, and other important psychological processes. Hence, the theory received good attention from scholars in its early days, due to its few fundamental and uncomplicated principles, which could make novel and non-obvious predictions. Cognitive dissonance theory has two basic underlying hypotheses. First, the existence of a dissonance will cause mental discomfort and motivate the individual to reduce the dissonance and restore consonance. Second, to reduce the dissonance, the individual will try to reduce it as well as avoid situations or information that are likely to increase the dissonance. In simple terms, a dissonance is an inconsistency in cognitive elements, which can be knowledge, opinions, beliefs, or the behaviors of an individual. The existence of such inconsistency causes mental discomfort and motivates the individual to take some actions to reduce or eliminate it. Festinger theorized that a pair of cognitive elements may relate to each other in three ways. Firstly, two cognitive elements may be relevant and consonant. Secondly, two cognitive elements may be relevant but dissonant. However, identification of the relationship may also be difficult, as two elements may be dissonant in one context, but not in another. Dissonance can arise from many sources, including, but not limited to, logical inconsistency, cultural differences, contradictions between specific opinions and their related general stand, and a disconfirmation of a past experience to a current situation. Lastly, two elements can be irrelevant to each other. There is a case when a pair of cognitive elements does not imply anything concerning one another. It can be challenging to deduce such a relationship because two elements may be indirectly linked. Therefore, researchers have to consider or make a reference to other cognitions before deriving a conclusion. One of the features that distinguished cognitive dissonance theory from other consistency theories was the concept of dissonance magnitude. The magnitude of dissonance depends on the number and importance of cognitions that the person experiences a consonance or dissonance with. The total tension of a dissonance is the proportion of the inconsistent cognitions to the consistent cognitions that one has, each weighted by its importance. The greater the amount or importance of dissonant cognitions and the smaller the number or importance of consonant elements, the greater the magnitude of dissonance one experiences. The tension of dissonance can fluctuate over time and does not follow a uniform pattern. However, the theory proposed that higher levels of dissonance can forcefully motivate a person to promptly address the psychological discomforts, while small levels of dissonance may not be as effective in encouraging the person to take an immediate action. The minimal tensions rather build up gradually over time before they are addressed. In general, there are 4 ways to reduce a dissonance. The dissonance magnitude decreases if the number of the dissonant cognitions decreases, the importance of the dissonant cognition decreases, the number of the consonant cognitions increases, and the importance of the consonant cognition increases. In other words, an individual can reduce the mental discomfort by changing the inconsistent cognitions, reducing the importance of conflicting elements, acquiring new harmonious elements, or increasing the importance of the existing consistent elements. Festinger used the case of a habitual smoker to demonstrate the theory. A smoker who knows that smoking is bad for health will experience dissonance, which causes mental discomfort, because the habit of smoking and the knowledge of how harmful smoking is are conflicting. Hence, there are 4 ways that the smoker can reduce the dissonance. First, the person could remove the dissonant cognition by either changing his behavior or knowledge. Second, the person could reduce the importance of the dissonant cognition by thinking that the risk of getting lung cancer from smoking is lesser than being in a car accident. Third, the person could increase the amount of consonant cognition by looking for positive effects of smoking. Lastly, the person could focus on the benefits of smoking as an important part of his or her life. As studies on dissonance reduction have grown, specific reduction strategies have been explored. Those include attitude change, distraction and forgetting, trivialization and self-affirmation, denial of responsibility, adding consonant cognitions, changing behavior and act rationalization. Attitude change is the change of conflicting attitudes to resolve the tension. Distraction and forgetting is a diversion of attention away from the dissonance and its negative effects. Trivialization is an act of minimizing the importance of dissonant cognitions to counteract the arising psychological discomfort. Self-affirmation happens when people reaffirm themselves about their important value. The person weakens the importance of a discrepant act and reasserts the sense of self-integrity. Denial of responsibility downplays the feeling of shame and guilt that may trigger dissonance. Adding new consonant cognitions to one's belief system can rationalize inconsistent behaviors. When behavior cannot be rationalized, people may change behavior, although it may be more difficult as it may involve pain and loss, addiction, or simply irreversible. Active rationalization concerns using a new problematic behavior that is consistent with a previous action to reduce dissonance. Although many studies have focused on a single dissonance reduction strategy, people may simultaneously adopt multiple strategies to counter the dissonance. This practice is commonly studied in relation to coping strategies. Cognitive dissonance theory has become popular among social psychology and social science researchers since its early days, due to its few tenets that are able to explain the complex process of dissonance. Festinger integrated various concepts, including attitudes, beliefs, perceptions, value and behaviors, which had been considered separately as a single construct of cognition. This treatment made it possible for scholars to understand the psychological process as a whole. However, the parsimonious nature of its formulation and application made the theory subject to the paradox of simplicity and raised concerns about overlooking confounding variables. Since dissonance is not restricted to logical inconsistencies, but is also bounded by other psychological and cultural factors, several scholars argued that dissonance was more complicated than is presented by the cognitive dissonance theory and not easy to create in an experiment. It also raised concerns over the experimental paradigms that have been used to demonstrate the theory. In response to the limitations of the theory, 3 revisions of cognitive dissonance theory have been proposed. Firstly, the self-consistency model addressed the paradox of the simplicity of the original theory by adding self-concept as a further explanation of dissonance. Secondly, the self-affirmation model focused on the overall self-image of moral and adaptive adequacy as an alternative explanation for attitude change. Lastly, the aversive consequences model also presented an alternative view on mental discomfort. This model proposed that the psychological stress was caused by the feeling of being self-responsible for inducing aversive consequences, rather than the inconsistency in cognitive elements. Thank you for listening. To download the full review or to read other theory reviews, visit open.ncl.ac.uk.